The dog first appeared after the 11:42. Freight passed through Blackwater Station. Nobody knew where he came from. Not the ticket clerk with the nicotine cough. Not the night janitor who salted the icy platform every morning before dawn. Not the railroad cops who drifted through town twice a month pretending the station still mattered. He just appeared one November evening beside track. Two like something the cold itself had dragged in. Lean, dark-coated, one torn ear, a faded leather collar with no tag. And every night after that he came back, always the same spot, near the rusted bench under the broken arrival board where half the letters no longer lit up. People assumed he belonged to somebody. In towns like Blackwater, people assumed lots of things because it was easier than asking questions. The station sat at the edge of town beside an old paper mill that had been dead for almost 15 years. Freight trains still thundered through at night, but passenger traffic barely existed anymore. 3 trains a day if the weather held, sometimes 2. Old men sat beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Reading newspapers nobody trusted anymore. Teenagers passed through without looking up from their phones. The loudspeaker crackled with delayed announcements in a voice that sounded exhausted, even when it wasn't snowing. And every evening, the dog waited by track 2, still watching, like someone had told him not to leave. At first, people tried feeding him. He ignored most of them. If someone got too close, he backed away immediately, stiff and alert. Never growling, never barking, just disappearing behind the station, storage sheds until the platform emptied again. Then he'd return, always returning. By December, people stopped noticing him altogether, except for Isabella. She moved to Blackwater 3 days before the first snow. 10 years old, too observant for her own good. Her mother called it thinking too much. The apartment they rented sat above a laundromat across from the train station. At night, the dryers hummed through the walls like distant engines. Her mother worked double shifts at the nursing home outside town and slept with one arm over her face even during daylight. Most mornings, Isabella walked to school, alone, carrying a backpack that looked heavier than she was. She didn't fit in quickly. Blackwater wasn't cruel exactly, just tired. Kids there had grown up together since kindergarten. They talked fast, laughed loud, knew which roads flooded during storms and which houses gave out full-sized candy bars on Halloween. Isabella arrived in the middle of winter wearing sneakers too thin for the snow. At recess, she mostly watched people. That's how she noticed the dog. The first time she saw him, he was lying beneath the departure board, while sleet tapped softly against the station windows. He looked dead at first, not sleeping, not resting, just completely still. The station lights flickered above him in pale yellow pulses. Isabella stood near the vending machines, holding a paper cup of hot chocolate her mother had bought before rushing to work. The dog slowly opened one eye, not afraid, not welcoming either, just aware. For some reason she couldn't explain. She sat down on the opposite bench without speaking. Outside, a freight train moaned somewhere deep in the dark. The dog watched her for maybe 10 seconds before lowering his head again. That was all. No magical moment, no instant friendship. But the next day she came back, and the next. Sometimes she sat for 20 minutes without the dog even looking at her. Sometimes he vanished completely. But eventually, Isabella began learning his patterns. He never appeared before sunset, never crossed onto Main Street, never entered the waiting room if more than 5 people were inside. And every night around 11:10, he walked to the far end of track 2 and stared north down the frozen rails. Every single night, even during storms, especially during storms. One evening, Isabella asked the ticket clerk about him. The man shrugged while stamping schedules nobody took anymore. Been around a while. How long? Couple years, maybe. Whose dog is he? The clerk looked out the window toward the platform. Thought he belonged to a conductor once, or maybe a drifter. He coughed into his sleeve. Hard to tell around here, but why does he wait there? The man gave a tired smile. Kid, everybody in this town's waiting for something. That answer bothered her for days, because it felt wrong. The dog wasn't waiting hopefully. He waited like it hurt. That winter arrived hard and early. The river froze by mid-December. Wind pushed snow through cracks in the station doors, collecting in little white piles near the benches. The dog grew thinner. Sometimes Isabella brought scraps from home, but she learned quickly not to hand feed him. If she left food several feet away and stepped back, he'd approach cautiously after a long silence. Always cautious, always watching escape routes. One night she noticed something strange. The dog limped when he thought nobody was looking. His left front paw barely touched the ground. But the second someone glanced toward him, he straightened immediately and hid it. That detail stayed with her, not because of the injury, because of the hiding. Like pain itself embarrassed him. A week before Christmas, Isabella missed school after catching a fever. Her mother left soup beside the couch before work and kissed her forehead without waking fully herself. By evening, the apartment windows had fogged from radiator heat. Outside, snow drifted thick over the empty streets. Isabella stood by the window looking down at the station. The platform lights glowed through the storm, and there he was, the dog, waiting alone in weather that made people run from parking lots to doorways. Something about it unsettled her deeply. Not pity, something heavier. Like seeing somebody continue a conversation after the other person had already left the room. That night, unable to sleep, she put on boots and quietly slipped downstairs. The station was nearly empty except for a janitor mopping near the ticket counters. The dog stood at the end of track 2, while snow collected along his back. Isabella approached slowly. He noticed immediately. His body stiffened. She stopped several feet away. For a long time, neither moved. Then, very quietly, she asked, "Who are you waiting for?" The dog looked past her, far down the tracks. And for the first time since she'd known him, Isabella heard him make a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A low, trembling whine so soft it almost disappeared beneath the wind. It sounded old, older than the dog himself somehow, and then headlights appeared beyond the crossing. A freight train thundered through the station without slowing. Snow exploded around them. Metal screamed against metal. The dog stepped backward immediately, panicked, retreating toward darkness near the storage sheds. But before disappearing completely, he looked back at Isabella. Just once, and she saw something she would remember years later. Not fear, recognition. Like she had accidentally asked the right question. After Christmas, the town started talking about shutting the station down completely. Nobody believed it at first. Blackwater had been dying slowly for decades. People talked about closures constantly. The mill, the diner, the hardware store, the church daycare. The station felt permanent because it had survived everything else. But by January, survey crews arrived. Men in reflective jackets photographed platforms and measured rail access while commuters pretended not to stare. The dog hated them instantly. Whenever the crews appeared, he vanished. One afternoon, Isabella found him behind the abandoned baggage building near a pile of frozen weeds and broken pallets. He tried leaving when he saw her, but his injured paw slipped badly on ice. For a brief second, he lost balance completely. And Isabella finally saw how severe the limp really was. The dog froze, embarrassed almost. Then he backed away slowly, breathing hard. "It's okay," she whispered. He didn't believe her, not yet. But he didn't run either. Snow drifted quietly between them. The town siren echoed 6 o'clock somewhere in the distance. And then Isabella noticed the tattoo. Faded blue numbers inside the dog's left ear. Not random. Railroad identification markings. The kind freight companies sometimes used years ago for working dogs around cargo yards. Suddenly, the dog became real in a new way. Not mysterious, not symbolic. A life, a history. Someone once knew this dog well enough to mark him. That realization changed everything. Isabella started researching at the library after school. Most records were incomplete, but eventually an older librarian remembered something. "There used to be a railroad mechanic," she said quietly. "Name was Walter Reed. Worked nights here years ago. Did he have a dog?" The librarian nodded slowly. "Black dog. Rode freight routes with him sometimes." She paused. Walter died. How? Heart attack, I think. During a winter storm. When? The librarian looked toward the window thoughtfully. About 2 years ago. Something cold moved through Isabella then. Not excitement, not revelation, just sadness beginning to take shape. That evening, she returned to the station, carrying nothing except a folded newspaper clipping the librarian had printed from archives. A blurry photo showed a tired-looking railroad mechanic standing beside a dark-coated dog outside Blackwater Station. Same torn ear, same eyes. The caption read, "Local rail worker honored after 30 years of service." The dog lay beneath the bench when Isabella approached. She sat quietly nearby. After several minutes, she unfolded the clipping and placed it on the ground between them. The dog noticed immediately. His entire body changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His breathing stopped for a second. His eyes locked onto the paper, and very slowly, unbelievably slowly, he stepped forward. One step, then another. Isabella stayed perfectly still. The dog lowered his nose toward the clipping. The station lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through snow. And then the dog did something no one had apparently seen him do in years. He rested his head gently against Isabella's knee, only for a moment, just long enough for her to stop breathing. Then he stepped away again. But the distance between them had changed forever. That should have been the emotional turning point. In most stories it would be, girl finds lonely dog, learns tragic backstory, dog finally trusts human. But real life doesn't move neatly, because the truth Isabella discovered next changed everything. 3 nights later, she overheard 2 railroad workers talking near the coffee machines. They should have put him down after the accident. What accident? The old mechanic's dog. Freight yard incident. What happened? The older worker lowered his voice. Dog caused it. Isabella stopped cold. The men continued talking quietly. Apparently, during the storm 2 years earlier, Walter Reed had entered restricted freight track searching for the dog after it disappeared during loading operations. A cargo chain snapped during low visibility. Walter died before paramedics arrived. Afterward, people blamed the dog. Not publicly maybe, but enough. Enough that nobody tried claiming him after the funeral. Enough that station workers stopped feeding him regularly. Enough that eventually he became part of the station itself. Like rust, like snow, like guilt nobody wanted to discuss. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep because suddenly the waiting looked different. Not loyalty, punishment. The dog hadn't stayed because he expected Walter to return. He stayed because he was the last witness. And maybe because animals don't understand forgiveness the way humans do. Maybe they only understand absence. The next evening, she found him near track 2 again, watching northbound rails beneath falling snow. "You think it was your fault?" she whispered. The dog didn't react, but she noticed his ears twitch slightly. And for the first time, she realized something devastating. Nobody had touched this dog kindly in years. Not really. Not after the accident. Adults looked through him now, or around him, like grief was contagious. Winter deepened. Blackwater Station grew emptier every week. Half the overhead lights stopped working entirely. The coffee stand closed permanently after New Year's. Snow covered the unused platform entrances, and Isabella kept returning. Not every day. Sometimes life interrupted. Homework, her mother's exhaustion, school projects, loneliness. But always eventually she returned. And slowly, carefully, the dog allowed more. He no longer disappeared immediately when she approached. He accepted food from closer distances. Once during heavy snowfall, he slept beneath her bench for nearly an hour. Still, he never allowed petting for long. One touch near the neck and he'd pull away instantly. Like memory lived there. One February afternoon, Isabella's mother finally noticed. "You're at that station constantly," Isabella shrugged. "There's a dog." Her mother sighed tiredly while removing nursing scrubs. "Sweetheart, you can't save every broken thing you find." "I'm not trying to save him." "Then what are you doing?" Isabella thought about it carefully. "He's lonely." Her mother gave a sad little smile. "So are we." That answer hurt because it was true. They had moved to Blackwater after Isabella's father disappeared from their lives quietly and completely. No screaming fights, no dramatic ending. Just absence that widened slowly over years until it became normal. Maybe that's why Isabella understood the station dog better than adults did. She understood waiting for someone long after hope became embarrassing. In late February, another storm arrived. One of those brutal American winter storms that erase roads and silence entire towns. The station announced temporary closure by evening. Most people stayed home, but around 9 o'clock, Isabella looked out her apartment window and saw the platform. Lights still glowing through snow, and beneath them, nothing. No dog. Hours passed, still nothing. A terrible feeling settled inside her. Before midnight, she bundled into layers and ran downstairs, through freezing wind toward the station. The waiting room stood nearly empty except for drifting snow. Entering through damaged doors. "Have you seen him?" she asked the janitor breathlessly. "The dog?" The old man nodded toward the freight yard. "Haven't tonight?" Isabella ran, past frozen loading docks, past abandoned cargo containers, past rusted chain fences half buried in snow. The storm swallowed sound completely. Then she heard it, a faint metallic clatter somewhere ahead. She found the dog beneath an overturned maintenance cart near the edge of the freight yard. His injured paw was trapped awkwardly beneath twisted metal. He didn't cry out when he saw her. He tried dragging himself away. Even hurt, he still expected danger first. "It's okay," Isabella whispered, kneeling in snow. "I know." The dog trembled violently. Not aggression. Fear. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then, slowly, Isabella reached toward the metal frame. The dog watched her carefully but didn't resist. Together, with a 10-year-old girl straining against frozen steel in the middle of a blizzard, they freed the paw. The dog immediately tried standing and nearly collapsed. "Easy," she said softly. This time, when her hand touched his neck, he allowed it. Outside, the storm raged against abandoned train cars. And there in the freezing dark, the dog finally leaned his weight against another living thing. Not fully, just enough. Enough trust to survive the night. Isabella brought him into the station. Maintenance hallway where heaters still worked. The janitor pretended not to notice. He simply left an old blanket near the radiator and walked away quietly. The dog slept heavily for hours, sometimes twitching, sometimes whining softly in dreams. At one point, Isabella woke to find him staring toward the tracks, through the hallway window, still watching, always watching. By morning, the storm had buried half the town, and for the first time in years, the station dog remained indoors after sunrise. Word spread quickly. People noticed, not dramatically, no sudden town-wide redemption, but small things shifted. The janitor left water bowls out regularly. The ticket clerk saved scraps from his lunch. A mechanic from the rail yard brought medicine for the injured paw without saying much. Nobody apologized. Real life rarely offers clean apologies, but guilt softened around the edges. And the dog slowly stopped looking over his shoulder every few seconds. Then March arrived. With it came the final closure notice. Blackwater Station would permanently shut down by spring. Passenger service terminated. Waiting rooms locked. Platforms abandoned. The town reacted the way tired towns do, quietly. Like another tooth finally falling out, Isabella read the notice 3 separate times. While the dog slept beside the radiator. "What happens to him?" she asked. Nobody answered, because everybody understood. When stations die, things attached to them disappear too. For the next few weeks, Isabella spent every possible hour there. Sometimes reading aloud softly while the dog rested nearby. Sometimes simply sitting together listening to train horns roll across melting snow. And gradually she learned something strange. The dog no longer waited at track 2 every night. Some nights he stayed near her instead, as if the waiting itself was weakening or changing shape. Then came the final evening. Cold rain replaced snow. Fog drifted low across tracks. The station lights flickered weakly against wet pavement. A handful of passengers boarded the last northbound train, while railroad employees avoided eye contact with one another. The dog sat beside Isabella beneath the broken arrival board, calm, tired, older somehow. The loudspeaker crackled one final departure announcement through static. Train doors closed, engines groaned, And slowly, the last passenger train Blackwater Station would ever see pulled away into darkness. The platform became silent. Not dramatic silence, real silence. The kind that feels permanent immediately. Workers began shutting lights off one section at a time. The ticket clerk locked windows. The janitor folded his mop bucket away. Someone disconnected the old coffee machines. And through all of it, the dog watched the empty tracks. Isabella knelt beside him. "You don't have to stay anymore," she whispered. The dog looked toward her slowly. Rain tapped against rusted metal roofing overhead. Then something happened so small most people would have missed it. The dog stood up, walked away from track 2, and followed Isabella toward the station exit. Not quickly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a decision made after years of thinking. Her mother waited beneath the street lamp outside the laundromat holding an umbrella. The dog stopped several feet away. Wind moved softly through his dark fur. Nobody spoke, because they all understood the moment was fragile. Then Isabella's mother crouched carefully and said the simplest thing possible. "You can come if you want." The dog stared at her for a long time. And finally, very carefully, he stepped forward. The station closed the next morning. By summer, weeds pushed through platform cracks. The windows boarded over. Rust spread across abandoned signs. Freight trains still passed sometimes at night without stopping. People in town eventually stopped talking about the station altogether. But occasionally, very late during winter evenings, neighbors near the laundromat apartment would notice an old, dark-coated dog sitting by the window watching. Distant tracks beneath snowfall, not trapped by waiting anymore, just remembering. Years later, Isabella would struggle to explain why the memory still hurt. Not because the story ended badly, not because it ended happily either, but because she eventually realized something adults rarely admit out loud. Some living things stay broken for so long that healing doesn't look joyful when it finally arrives. It looks quiet, careful, almost invisible. Like a dog standing up after years beside an abandoned train platform and choosing very slowly to walk away.